It's been a quiet week in Storrs, Connecticut, my hometown, out on the edge of the campus. We've been taking a bit of a break from apparent summer these last couple of days and re-exploring the sort of cold, rainy days that are more commonly associated with early spring or maybe late autumn or even a particularly depressing winter. Of course, the thing about this particular style, this particular brand of rainy day is that if you go out to your window and really look closely at the trees and grass and everything outside, when you look at it against the gray sky, it almost seems greener, more vivid, more vibrant, as if every drop of rain is soaking down into the leaves and branches and as part of the act of being absorbed, seeping into every crevice contained therein and intensifying every single molecule of chlorophyll, beaming it directly to your eyes, as if the rain clouds had sneaked into the metaphorical bedroom of every single branch of every single tree and said, "Wake up!" Or should I say, "Wake up!" I put my mouth too close to the microphone, hoping my mother does not complain about it that time. Anyway, it's a beautiful phenomenon when you stop and look at it, but the thing is, it only works if you have a positive attitude, and there are plenty of people here in Storrs who would apparently rather eat nails and drink nail polish than admit that a cold, rainy day is in any way beautiful. I was recently at the Dog Lane Cafe. Come, sit, stay. And I was sitting at a table by the window waiting for the bartender Howard K. Teasdale to bring me my chocolate strawberry daiquiri, when I noticed an attractive young man stride confidently into the restaurant, and after he ordered a lemonade cocktail, or possibly a lemonade mocktail, he strode equally confidently over to an equally attractive young woman who was sitting alone at a table near the center of the room, and after confidently standing there for a few seconds, he said to her, "Lousy weather, isn't it?" And she looked up and smiled and said, "Yeah, please sit down." And so they chatted for a good 23 minutes as I looked on enjoying my chocolate strawberry daiquiri. And shortly after she left, I went over to him and said, I have to wonder, why is it that no one seems to have anything positive to say about the weather these days? And he replied, "Well, I couldn't just walk up to her and tell her that it was a nice day, because then she'd know that I was trying to pick her up. So instead I made a negative comment and she was instantly intrigued." But negative comments are so rare in Storrs Center that I just had to take notice. You know, it reminds me of a story I once heard about a deer and an antelope who were playing one day, and all of a sudden the deer turned his head to the side and stood rigid, as deer so often do, and the antelope asked him, "What's the matter?" And the deer replied, I thought I just heard a discouraging word." When you say a discouraging word in Storrs Center, people notice. It's that kind of place. There's so much to see. There's so much to do. You can have lunch at the Dog Lane Cafe. Come, sit, stay. Or you can get a bag of candy at Sweet Emotions, or you can run laps around the town square, or you can walk up to random people and see if they agree with you in thinking that Storrs Center's only flaw is that it should have been called the Storrs of Storrs. That's the other thing about Storrs Center. There are so many random people. In fact, I'm willing to bet that if Storrs Center had an official motto, which it probably should, it would be, "All people are random, but some are more random than others." For example, the other day as I was strolling up and down the walkway that leads from the Dog Lane Cafe to Sweet Emotions, I encountered two middle-aged men, both of whom were going up to random people and telling puns, but they had very different approaches, these two middle-aged men. The first guy I encountered would go up to random people and ask them to name a topic, and then he would supply a pun about that topic. For example, if you said trees, he might say, "Son, I've told quite enough puns about trees for one day. Don't you think it's time I branched out into another topic?" And if your topic was music, he might say, "Son, all my life I've been doing almost nothing but telling puns about music. Don't you think it's time I marched to the beat of a different drum?" One kid asked him to tell a pun about puns, to which he responded, "Son, you're ignoring the pundamentals." But the other guy didn't even bother asking. He would just walk up to unsuspecting people and stand in front of them and tell longer, more extended puns. So he went up to one unsuspecting person and said, "Did you know that trees are contagious? Apparently the other day there were 2 sycamore trees standing right next to each other, and one of them said to the other, 'Will you quit coughing and sneezing on me? I'm already sick, and you're only making me sicker more.'" So he came up to me and told a pun that anyone who knows a thing or two about classical music is sure to appreciate. He said, "You know, the other day I was in the East Brook Mall down at the south end of Storrs, or possibly Mansfield, and I noticed some workers installing a protective ring to go around the base of a decorative fountain that was right outside the front door. So I went into the mall and asked this young lady, 'Do you know what's going on outside?' And she said, 'Mister, I'm afraid we're in the mall of the fountain ring.' And I responded, 'Well, that's very intriguing, but I've heard of people who have spent so much time in the East Brook Mall that they've been mauled to death.' And the man, outpunned, turned his back and walked away. You know, of the many random people who drift in and out of Storrs Center each day, I'll bet there are at least 39 who think the town square of Storrs Center would look better if there were a fountain in the middle of it. But I have to say, whether or not you like everything about the town square of Storrs Center, it never fails to be aesthetically intriguing. For one thing, there's the fact that contained within this town square there lies a circle. In fact, depending on how you look at the town square at any given moment, it might look like a circle within a square one moment and a square within a circle the next moment. Sometimes you even have to squint in order to see the actual square, because it might temporarily look more like 2 triangles put together, or even worse, a parallelogram. Because if the town square serves one purpose, it's to bring people's attention to geometrical concepts that they did not know existed. In fact, a few days ago I was sitting on a bench in the town square enjoying a bag of candy I had bought at Sweet Emotions, when I looked up and saw a cluster of 5 local geometry teachers who seemed to be holding some sort of contest among themselves. And I looked closer and saw one of the geometry teachers, Frank Hemicord, collecting index cards from the other 4, and I realized that they were holding a contest to name the town square, and the moment I realized this, he started reading off the cards. He, Mr. Hemicord, had voted to name it the town circle within a square. Another geometry teacher, Mrs. Rebecca Rhomboid, had voted to name it the Town Unspecified Quadrilateral. The third teacher, Mr. William Piechart, had voted to name it the Town Blob. And the fourth teacher, Mrs. Ellen Conjectureton, had voted to name it the place in Storrs Center where there really should be a fountain. But the winner of the contest was the fifth teacher, Mr. Alan Theorem, who had voted to name the town square Jack. But then tragedy struck the town square naming contest as the 5 geometry teachers fully realized something that they must have known all along, the fact that the contest was unofficial. They may have been geometry teachers, but they were not town officials, and therefore they realized they had no authority to officially name the town square. Now, Mr. Theorem, who was particularly distraught about this realization, having been the winner of the contest, reasoned that it might have had a bit more legitimacy if only he had thought to change his name to Mayor Alan Theorem a few days earlier. The way I see it, that may or may not have had any difference, but the mood was not cheerful among those 5 geometry teachers that day as they slowly came to the realization that all their actions out there in the town square had been for nothing. As for me, my mood was cheerful, mainly because I happened to be eating candy. I also couldn't help thinking that due to the geometric idiosyncrasies I already discussed, simply calling the town square really was every bit as intriguing as calling it the Town Unspecified Quadrilateral. But as I sat there on the bench in the town square, I came to realize that that's the thing about life. Sometimes it seems as if your actions are all for nothing, and maybe you feel that way because you fail at everything you try, or because you don't have any friends, or because you think about mortality a bit too often, but this feeling of futility can sometimes threaten to overwhelm you like a giant squid engulfing a cluster of plankton, or a cluster of geometry teachers, for that matter. Even as I read you this monologue, I fear that you did not understand the metaphor I just included. I fear that you recognize that the metaphor I just included was not a metaphor, but a simile, and therefore I fear that my attempt to include a metaphor in this monologue was all for nothing. But I'm happy to say that in my many years of life I have found a way to combat this feeling. You just have to find something you enjoy doing. Which reminds me of the summer of 1969, back when I was a student at UConn. Now, I wasn't feeling particularly responsible that summer, so I wasn't taking any classes, but seeing as I lived right on the edge of the campus in true Storrs fashion, I did have a radio show that summer, and of course I wanted all my friends to listen to my radio show, so I designed these little cards that had the time of the show and the radio station on them so that I could hand the cards out to various people, and what I would do was I would write out the cards on paper, 10 to a page, and then I would tear them apart into individual cards. So one day, just before my show started up that summer, I was sitting outside the radio studio tearing apart my latest sheet of cards when the manager of the radio station, Jason McKemmett, came out and noticed me and asked, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I did up these little cards to hand out to people to let them know about my show. I'm just tearing them apart so that I can hand them out." And Jason said, But why are you going to all the trouble of tearing them apart yourself? Wouldn't it be easier to just use a pair of scissors?" And I looked Jason in the eye and said with all the gravity I could muster, "In life, sometimes we must choose between what is easy and what is fun." And that is a principle that I'm proud to say I have stuck to ever since. And that's the news from Storrs, Connecticut, where all the women are strong, all the men are good-looking, and all the geometry teachers are above average.